Hi, Sydney. How are you? It's so good to have you
I'm
today.
well. Thank you. Great to be here.
We're
Thank
very
you for
excited to
asking.
have you on this panel for Toon Boom's ATE. I think we're going to have a really
Mhm.
good conversation about your career path. Um, so I'm going to introduce you a little bit for those who are listening. Sydney, you had over 20 years of experience as an executive producer and development executive of animated and live action content across multiple platforms. You served as Jim Henson's company's VP of Animation and Mixed Media, and now as producer. And you're also a senior consultant with Black Women Animate. So, as a
Mhm.
mentor and recruiter, you've been a featured speaker at colleges, universities all across North America, and now we're very excited to have you here as well.
Thank
Um,
you.
and also very excited that your passion is what led you to develop a whole community and a whole support for the underserved communities of writers and artists and storytellers, and this is what
Mhm.
led you to launch the Clifton House, which I think we'll be able to talk about later. And so the
Sure.
Clifton House, for those who don't know, is a writers and artists workshop and retreat space centered at your childhood home in Baltimore, Maryland. And I think you'll be able
Mhm.
to tell us more about it in a second.
Sure. Happy to.
All right. So I think we can get started. If you don't mind telling us a little bit more about your current role and what you've been up to lately.
Oh, sure. As you've mentioned, I am a producer for the Jim Henson Company, producing a preschool series called Slumberkins that launched on Apple TV Plus in November last year, and have been just basically developing and producing, like I said, for the past 20 years, but specifically for the Henson Company on that show, and also produced Harriet the Spy for Apple TV Plus animated series for the Jim Henson Company as well. So essentially continuing to be a storyteller. I'm excited about what I do. I love stories and storytelling and storytellers. So it's a sort of thing where regardless of what's happening in the industry, and we know it's tough right now, we continue to tell stories and find ways to, for me, finding ways to support the visions of storytellers, whether myself or others, and primarily others, frankly, um, taking their idea, taking their concept from an idea to the finished product. And it's just the process that I love and adore. So I'm just continuing to do that in on sort of different, various and sundry different ways.
Okay. No, that's amazing. Um, like you said, the industry is definitely going through a couple changes right now.
Mhm.
So, based on what you're saying, you're still able to support the community through that sense. How are you able to do that nowadays?
You know, it's interesting. I feel that because I've been in this industry for so long, part of my job is to be a resource. So that's not, and what I mean by job is not I'm compensated for,
Mhm.
doing
Yes.
such and such. What I mean is I have experience that could be useful to people. So I'm happy to for people to reach out and ask questions or ask for guidance. Um, and I also still love to read and love to love development and production. So I just surround myself or leave myself open for questions and comments and to be of service to the community in what I hope is a meaningful way.
Okay. That's definitely something that I think everyone's very grateful for. Um, do
Mhm.
you remember how this started in your role? Where over the years you found you had more and more experience, and you had questions come your way, and that kind of solidified into what your role is now in helping the community?
I think it's interesting. When I started, I was a little older when I started in the industry, frankly, and I'd already been, a grown up and married and had children. And so starting in industry, I had a lot of questions.
Okay.
And I think the fact that when I started, there were not a lot of resources and certainly not a lot of people who looked like me or had sort of similar backgrounds and similar sort of visions and such for their lives and careers. So I recognized that if I had questions, other people did too. And I started having conversations with people who were all wanting to know some of the same things, trying to figure out what those career paths might be, how to get to the next level, who what are the resources that were available at that time. So having the questions, I remember that, and I want to be someone who can then provide answers because for me, the idea of giving back while I'm on this journey is very, very important. And there have been people in my career who have been very kind and generous with their time and their experience, and very honest about their experience as well, which has been helpful to me. And I'd like to do the same for others. And I just think it's sort of kind of the way I was raised, honestly, that that communities are stronger when we're sort of working together toward goals, even if that goal, even if someone else's goal is not mine,
Yeah.
if my experience can be helpful, that just it, in my experience, raises the bar for the community, for engagement, um, and for multiple people to realize their visions and dreams, and to feel encouraged to keep going.
Okay. Oh, that's true. And it somehow
Also,
it might help their goals, and then someone else's goal will be helped by those people.
exactly. And you pay it forward and pay it forward. Also, I'm a mom and I'm answering questions all day. So,
That's true.
so I think I'm wired to do that. I'm also the oldest of 6 children. So I've always felt sort of responsible for making sure that people are playing together nicely and people are feeling, respected and heard and valued in the community, large or small.
Okay. Well, that's important. So I guess we'll touch base on two of the things that you said, but the first one was making people feel heard. How do you think
Mm.
you're able to do that from your different roles?
Well, first of all, you have to leave space for other people's um, to speak, to ask questions, to be engaged in the process. So for me, as a producer, or even as an executive producer, I always invite the input of others in a project. It just makes it better, and it's also fun. Frankly, I think it's possible to be a leader and recognize that the vision is the goal and not the uplift of yourself being the goal.
Mm-hmm.
It's the vision of that project. And everyone who is involved in it should feel like they have a space at the table. Because I've been in places where I didn't feel like I did. So it's really important to me that I provide that. And regardless of people's positions on a production or in development, does it just the input of everyone contributes to the success of not only the product, but the process, that everyone has to feel like they're part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, for me, it just makes something that sometimes is tedious just more difficult.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. So one of the things you mentioned as well, so speaking of making people feel heard and kind of bringing
Hmm.
people on board,
Hmm.
are there a lot of questions that come back? So some of the same questions, and have they changed over the years for people who are new to the industry?
I think the initial questions don't change that much. What I'm finding, because people want to know, what do you do? How can I do it? And what should I look out for? What should I do? What should I not do?
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to share both sort of the successes and the missteps. And the missteps are just lessons. So I like, don't do that one again, right?
Yeah.
Or that's not a thing to repeat. But this was successful, so let's repeat that. But I also recognize that everyone has their own path. So what I can share is this I have seen generally works for people doing X, Y, or Z who are on this path.
Mm-hmm.
This might not be. I think a lot of people, but I speak at, you'd mentioned I speak at art schools and such, and sort of mentor emerging artists and in animation, and I've done that for many years and love that. And essentially, people want to know the same. How do I get a job?
Yeah.
What should my resume look like? How do you do the portfolio? What skills should I have? How should I approach people for potential mentorship? What
Mm-hmm.
does mentorship even look like now?
Yeah.
Right? Because after a pandemic, things don't have to be in person. Um, we can be effective, digitally. There are times where the human, you know,
Yes.
just contact is useful, and I prefer it because I'm a hugger, so I like that. But by the same token, you can still be useful. 10 minutes on a Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
if you're really engaged and your intention is honest. Um, so I say all that to say I don't think the questions have changed that much, because ultimately people are sort of wanting to know how to get or keep a job or how to increase their skills. I am getting more questions, however. First of all, I'm seeing more, women and people of color entering the industry and wanting to know how to network. I'm getting more questions about what do I look out for, or how do you deal with X, Y, or Z, any of the isms, right? And I appreciate the fact that people are willing to have that conversation. And hopefully we won't have to have the conversations
Hopefully
forever.
over time. Hopefully. Yeah, I think it's
hopefully. But as long as we do, we'll just, it's the fact that people want to keep talking, I find encouraging.
That's good. Yes. And it's true that I think you can reach more people remotely. There's a freedom in that. But it's true that, like you said, some of the conversations still need to happen over some of those topics, which, we're happy to have them, as long as, like you said, one day maybe we won't have to have them anymore.
Right.
But no, that's so. I guess on that note, would you mind sharing a little bit what you would advise to someone who's starting right now, and how they can get a job, or where they should start?
And my very frustrating answer to this always starts with "it depends." And I know nobody wants to hear that. The basics, I think, remain the same, that your portfolio needs to be really strong, that your resume is up to date and complete, and there are no typos in it, just sort of the basics. The other part is recognizing the state of the industry, because some of it is we have this talent and we have this passion and we're ready to go forward, and right now with the way things are happening, especially in content, it's tough for everybody. So I think the biggest piece of advice I would have is don't give up.
Okay.
Don't give up. If you are passionate about what it is you do, just stay centered, because I will tell you that as I said, it was in the industry. I entered it relatively late, but I've been writing since I was a teenager. I started out with the goal of being a writer. And when I went into the industry, into development, I was at Film Roman. That was the animation studio that produces The Simpsons and King of the Hill. And I started there as a development coordinator for my supervisor, who's a VP. And development and writing and storytelling was my goal. And I ended up pivoting. I did not give up the writing and storytelling goal. So I guess my advice would be don't give up, and be prepared to pivot. That when I was working with animators and writers and designers, I really loved that process. Okay. So because I was open and recognized that there is still a way for me as a writer storyteller to contribute to a project, I found in those years in that development that I was a better producer than a writer, or I was a stronger producer than a writer, and was able to be more effective more quickly. So I love it. I didn't know I was capable, but I ended up loving the process and loving that work. So the fact that I was able to stay focused on the storytelling, even though I thought writing was the thing, and I still get to write. I still do that. Okay. But I was able to be successful as a producer. And what I also found was that being a successful producer allows you to work with lots of different people and have that experience of being part of a team and growing a team and providing, in some cases leadership, but sometimes just like an open ear, the camaraderie, someone to brainstorm with. Loved that. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. I think, and there's something about being a producer, I think, where your experience as a writer will definitely enrich it. And there's just so much that you're bringing to the table to be able to hold the team together and bring everyone forward. So it's really interesting.
100%.
And you've worked on quite a few different projects. Are there some that you remember more vividly that you kind of stood out in terms of the experience that you learned from them?
Well, they all had something that I learned from them. And that's a very mom answer because I have 4 children. So it's like, it's like, I'm sorry, and a pop-up came on my phone. I'm
Oh,
gonna
good.
move that. So I don't have a favorite, but there are things about each of them that I love. So for example, on Black Panther, they did with for BET and Marvel, Black Panther animated series. Um, First of all, working on that IP was amazing, but
Imagine.
also being able to, and working, I also someone who loves working with voice actors and casting and such.
Hmm.
So being able to see that come to life was amazing. Working with Reggie Hudlin and Dennis Cowan and the team at Titmouse also was amazing. Um, and I have to say that was like the first project that I worked on that was primarily content about people of color. So that was really exciting to me. By the same token, I, both Harriet the Spy and the Me Eloise series are based on books that I loved as a kid. And the fact that we were able to, in both those instances, create really strong content with great writers, showrunners, and maintain the integrity of the art of the books. Chef's kiss.
Yes.
Amazing. I'm so proud of those shows. I'm so proud of those. Then on there's a Christmas special that we produced with Harry Connick Jr. That was CG, and it was just really interesting to. It was a great experience, a learning experience to be able to develop a special
Hmm.
based on a song. It was an
That's true.
original Christmas song that Harry did. And then it was Harry Connick Jr. So of course it was awesome. Let's see, and then there was another series. Oh my gosh, I did three seasons of a sci-fi comedy called Tripping the Rift that was on Sci-Fi Channel back in early 2000s.
Okay.
Not for children. It was PG-13. And the fact that it was well received, a little odd. It was based on a short that had been produced at Film Room at the time, and it was funny because in that at that time, which is not unusual, in terms of people who had creative input,
Hmm.
I was the only woman who had creative input
Yeah.
at that time, and was and worked with our team at Cinegroup in Montreal actually, and it was fun. It was irreverent. And the fact that I was able to sort of liaise between the artists and the writers and the network, and maintain that big picture and do what, sort of either executives in charge of a production or producers do. You maintain the big picture, make sure that we are on time and on budget,
Hmm.
and that everyone, again, that everyone feels understood, heard, valued, and that their contributions are mattering. And if someone stumbles, just like I do as a mom, sort of gather them up a bit, give them some guidance, and let people do their jobs. So all of those were just amazing experiences for in some cases very different reasons.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome. And so it feels like mentorship was already a sort of part of your role as a producer, so it was easy to grow that from there.
I think so. I think so. And again, I think because I'm, the oldest of 6 children and a mom when I
Yep.
started, I think it's kind of part of that.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I think you're kind of bringing the family together, making sure everyone's needs are met when possible, and then
Yes,
getting everyone
exactly.
home happy and
Right.
on time.
Exactly. And it helps. I think it also helps to like people, to generally like people,
Mhm.
and to really know who you are. Um, because I recognize that it's not always easy, but there are times when if I know that if I know my place, I'm not threatened by someone else being in the space. Um, and I feel like if I'm surrounding myself with people who are awesome and doing great stuff, that makes me look good because that means I made great choices. But also, I applaud other people's success, and I think that's something that, especially as women, but as artists, I think that's something that is important that we do. That we applaud the successes of others and recognize that their success doesn't threaten mine.
Yes, absolutely. Um, Do you find that there's more groups or more resources available since the 2000s for women and people of color?
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. And there's more people just in the machine, frankly. Um, and even sort of in the schools, I've noticed that there are more programs and then more
Okay.
resources and more people teaching and more software choices, more those more training available in many different ways,
Mhm.
in person, brick and mortar, and digitally that people have access to, or more people are getting access to. The other part is that when you see someone doing the thing that you want to do, it's easier to decide that maybe I could do that too. Where for a long time people weren't seeing that, So
Yes.
we're seeing a lot more now.
Yes, absolutely. Which is what you were saying for networking, that this helps because if they can talk to someone who's done it, then they can understand how they can get
Yes,
there.
absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes you don't understand. You understand in hindsight. You go like, oh, so that's what that was. That's what
Yes.
that lesson was about. That's what that is.
Mhm.
And even if it's just to have someone to bounce things off, I think that's helpful.
Okay. No, that's always good. So with all these experiences that you had, which what led you to creating the Clifton House, or what kind of prompt you to get it started?
You know, it's interesting because the context is my mom was a poet and children's book author. She
Mhm.
was the poet laureate of Maryland for 7 years back in late 70s to 80s. And the house that my family and I grew up in Baltimore was a huge house that had lots of people coming through. Both my parents were very much activists and artists and mentors in their own right.
Mhm.
Um, and I mentioned I'm the oldest of six children, so it was my mom and dad and six of us, and just the atmosphere and community of uh, seeing people give back while they're building their careers. So my mom's poetry career began while we lived in that house,
Mhm.
but she was still mentoring for people. She was still teaching. My dad was still doing the same thing. He was a community activist, but also was a painter and a sculptor. My dad actually painted this painting that's behind
That's
me right now.
awesome. I didn't know.
Um, yeah, and my parents lost the house to foreclosure, um, and then we all moved, and sort of life went on. And
Mhm.
then in 2019, well, both my parents had passed. In 2019, I actually reached out to the owner of the house and asked about the status of it, and she said that it went on the market that day. So I decided that that must mean that I should be considered a potential buyer.
Wow.
And so, long story short, I did buy the house back, and that was sort of going to be the end of it. But this is the artist intuitive kind of piece. Um, one morning, I was thinking about what the house meant to us when we were growing up,
Mhm.
and I felt like that's what the house needed to be again. So just established the Clifton House because I wanted to have a place where emerging writers, artists, activists, people who are walking in, have the intersection of those things, can have a place where they can go to be and have and develop their craft, but also be in community with people who are trying to do the same things. See people who look like them and have done the thing. See people who look like them and are doing the thing, are just starting out. Um, I think because of the way I grew up, that made the house and my parents, I think, made me who I am. And I wanted to give back to them and their legacy, but also, again, pay forward to um, emerging artists, writers, poets, and and people sort of in the gaps, so they can see what kind of possibilities there are.
Mhm.
Find people who can help them, lead them on the way in that community, especially. Um, because Baltimore's been through some stuff, there it's been difficult, but also the arts community in Baltimore is burgeoning. It's starting to grow, and I just want to be part of that
Mhm.
movement. And as my parents were, being part of a movement about the intersection of art and activism, but how art can change lives and change opinions and can be movements rather than just sort of the product.
Mhm.
It's really important, and this is a way I feel like I can contribute.
It seems crucial, and I think I like what you were saying. And stories sometimes can bring that message
Yes,
through, and like you said, with the right art and the right medium and the right people, it just has such a
yes,
huge impact.
yes, 100%, absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
so, what has been some of the recent activity with the house? Are there workshops that are planned? Are there anything that's remote, which I guess might be a bit harder, but what are you up to these days?
Remote has been like the only thing up because of COVID,
Yeah.
because people just weren't moving around. However, we had our first 2-day artist workshop back in October, and I found it magical because we were in person and we were hosting a group. There's a City Lit Foundation, City Lit organization in Baltimore, but also a group called Scribente Materna Moms Who Write. And they're these mothers who just came for this 2-day program at the house, in the house, where they practiced the craft, and we had speakers, and there was refreshments and things, and it was full day, and there was dancing and
Nice.
community, and it was just amazing and magical. And I could feel my mom and my dad sort of smiling as it was going on.
Oh,
I loved it. I was probably like floating on that for a good 2 weeks after that.
that's amazing.
So we do have more workshops planned,
Okay.
and when we have the schedule, it will be up on our website, which is thecliftonhouse.co. So you can find out more there, or also on our Instagram, Clifton House Baltimore.
Okay. So
That's where you can find us.
Nice. So people will be able to go and find you. Awesome. And are there any other initiatives that you're part of now, or things that you're planning on doing in the upcoming year?
In terms of just generally, or Clifton House, or which things?
I guess both Clifton House or in general for mentorship or community building.
Well, yeah. So for me, the mentorship piece is always important.
Mhm.
So I am happy if someone wants to link in with me, and what I would suggest is link in with me, mention that you were on this, and if you have any questions about any career stuff, I'm kind of an open book, so I'm happy to have a chat. I You might have to ping me twice
Yes.
because, so please do not take it personally if I don't answer immediately. But so that's part of community building. The other part is there will, like I mentioned, there will be other initiatives at Clifton House, some of them virtual, some of them hybrid, some of them in person. Also, in terms of the things that are happening at Jim Henson Company, I would say happy to answer questions about that experience, or if there are other projects or other questions you might have that I'm happy to sort of introduce or connect people with the appropriate executives at Henson to answer those questions. What else? Yeah, honestly, it's about just keeping it moving, keeping
Yeah,
it open,
that's
and
it.
keeping it positive.
Yeah, and I'm sure that already kind of keeps you busy. So
Oh yes.
when you're saying people can reach out on LinkedIn, what's usually a way that you find, or if you're advising someone on how to mentor or how to network, what's a good way to reach out to someone? Usually, do you find?
Honestly, I use your social media wisely, I'd say.
Okay.
LinkedIn is probably the first stop because it's the one that's known to be professional. So there's a little bit of it doesn't feel quite as odd for someone to reach out, do like a cold reach out on LinkedIn.
Okay.
But I would also say, if you're doing that, try to write a note with it. Just even if it's, I admire your work and would love to connect. I would love to, if you're available for like a 10 or 15-minute just Q&A to pick your brain about, or I could ask some questions. Would you be open to informational interview? If people have time, people like to be helpful. I'm finding, and if they don't, that's fine. Continue to keep looking. I was going to say, using social media wisely. People who are, generally speaking, sort of mid-career, later career, are probably either on Instagram or Facebook. They're probably not TikToking. But I think using any of those, just with respect,
Yes.
honestly, approach people with respect and grace, and not having expectations that you will be answered immediately. You may not be answered at all, but you have done your job, and then you're practicing for the next time.
Mm-hmm.
So I always feel like every no, it just gets you closer to your yes.
That's a good way to put it. Do you find that there's trends from some of the younger artists, or stories that are coming back, or just the new ideas there?
I'm sort of the proponent of everything old is new again.
Yes.
Because we've seen things in cycles, right? What I've been excited to see are more stories about people of color or people who are LGBTQA plus, people being more courageous in their storytelling, people being more authentic in the characters that they're portraying, even if they're sort of anthropomorphic, various foods and stuff. I think people are wanting to tell more, audacious storytelling. That I'm liking. In kids and family, I'm seeing a lot of stories about neurodiverse children. I'm actually developing a show about with partners at Rehab Entertainment and Jim Henson Company, about a little girl who is neurodiverse. So that's been interesting. I think that part of it may be because of COVID, we're asking ourselves a lot of questions.
That's true.
And I think what storytellers do often is, this is something my mom used to say. Most of the she would say this about her poems. Her poems were not about answers; they're about questions. I think a lot of what we're seeing in content, in kids and family content, is as well. It's like, what if this? How would I do this? If I'm this person, how do I walk in the world? I think some of those are like fundamental foundations for storytelling. The other piece is like, people just want to laugh, right? So a lot of comedy. Things have gotten a little silly. I'm liking seeing the musical trend, because I love musicals. So the fact that the musicals are also smart and silly. That's in kids and family. In primetime, sometimes it's like, how many boobs can I put in a thing? So
where's the limit?
Like, right. It's like, I think I didn't mean to roll my eyes when I said that, but what I meant by that was that I think in primetime, what I'm liking is the capacity for audacity and authenticity there as well in storytelling.
Yes.
So, yeah.
There's a sense of freedom in animation that maybe in live action there's more limitations.
Oh yeah.
Whereas in animation you can have fun with it. So
you can. Makes it challenging sometimes to try to pitch, to try to sell, but it's still, I think at the end of the day, it's, did you make the thing you wanted to make?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
So how is it pitching for some of these stories? Are you finding that the conversations are different than they were 20 years ago at different stages?
They are, but it is different sets of limitations because there are always these limitations. Well, we have a this. Well, that's so. Although the blanks that are being filled in about the questions that are being asked might be different, the process is pretty much the same.
Okay.
And for the past couple of months, as you're aware, it's been tough because of all of the changes that are happening, and streaming having the impact it had on how buyers are buying, if buyers are buying, and how many episodes they're buying. So that's it's a little tricky right now.
Yes, it's certainly been a little bit interesting. I think we're still seeing a little bit of the aftershocks of some of those changes.
Yes, 100%.
Are you, but based on your experience, have you seen this happen before and the industry has kind of...
oh, yeah.
Okay. It's kind of recovered. It just happens every once in a while.
Yeah, every once in a while there's this reset, and then we kind of sit back and watch and see how we need to pivot. But at the end of the day, honestly, I don't know if storytellers need to pivot. I think you might need to pivot expectations or reset your expectations,
Okay.
but as your integrity as a storyteller, I don't think needs to change.
Okay, that's good. And you're saying the process is still similar. Do you mind telling us a little bit about how these shows are pitched for those who aren't too familiar?
Sure. So essentially, I mean, going in as a person who does the pitches, and I'll speak from that um, perspective and from the taking pitches perspective. So you have to be prepared with what is who are your characters, what is the world, and what's going to make me want to watch this on a consistent basis. Um, and we usually come with a pitch deck, which might be 6 to 10 pages. As a leave behind. Sometimes people provide scripts, not always. And generally speaking, we would not, unless someone orders a script. Generally, people don't go into a pitch with a script, but you do go in with knowing who your characters are, telling the buyers what the stories will look like, and what the relationships are between the characters. And again, why is it different, and why this difference now? And also why you should be the person to tell the story or produce the story. What brings you there? I think going into a pitch also with knowing those things very clearly, but also the passion for your storytelling shows through. Because at the end of the day, the buyers only have, now this from the buyer side, buyers generally only have a certain amount of money to spend to develop or a show or produce a show. They generally have only a certain number of slots available for their shows on their schedules or if on a platform like on the platform. They have their mandates. We have to do this many shows for this much money, and we'll drop them at these certain times. So I think what you need to do is convince the buyers that not only is this show perfect for their distribution platform, whatever it is, channel, but that you're somebody that they'd want to do business with for the next year and a half to 2 years, and that you don't necessarily have to have done it before, but that's helpful, So the more you can eliminate their no's, the more the better chance you have at selling and setting it up. However, you must also be prepared that you're going to hear no far more than you're going to hear yes.
Yes, that makes sense.
It's hard. Yes. Yeah.
Were there some big no's in your life that you pushed through, or you had a story you were passionate about and you really pushed for it to come through? And were there times where maybe it worked and maybe sometimes where you had to wait for the better time?
All of the above. Okay. There definitely have been no's. I'm probably not going to talk about them too much because I'm very, very stubborn, and I believe in the stories I believe in. I'm not stubborn. I'm not blindly stubborn. I don't think. I think that there are times when, again, because stories come back. Sometimes it's just not the right time for certain kinds of stories.
That's it.
So then you wait. But I think all creatives kind of feel that way. And I have pushed through, and it has been sometimes it's worked, sometimes it has not. When it has worked, it feels really good. It feels like I knew I could trust my instincts. When it doesn't, I have to admit, there are days where you go like, am I just crazy? Is this not that cool? And then I think that's when you sort of get out of your head, and it's not like you ask all your friends, what do you all think about this? But sometimes you need to put something away, step back, and then return to it so that you can look at it with fresh eyes, or get a trusted creative partner to look at it with fresh eyes and sort of be a little bit of that devil's advocate. Say, well, what if this? What if that? And if you're smart and creative, and I think creatives know when something's working and when something doesn't, when something hits right. If someone has some feedback that's useful, thank them, because they're just raising the bar on the project. because again, as I said earlier, it's about the project. It's not about the you in it. You're the steward of it, but the project is the thing that needs to shine.
Okay. Was there a specific project that you saw through, but maybe went through a couple challenges, and you were like the it was very creative, but you did have to push through to make it happen? One in particular. I'm sure there's a few examples.
I know. There are. Well, I can talk about one that's not animated. It's a project that I produced, directed with the poet and activist and icon Maya Angelou in her home in North Carolina. I produced 13 episodes of this show, and it has not seen the light of day. So that was one of those that it was life-changing, and one day it will see the light of day. I am convinced, and not giving up on that, because it was amazing, an amazing process, amazing experience, and really was life-changing for me as a producer and an artist and a human being, honestly.
Mm-hmm. That definitely seems like a project that I would love to be able to see. So maybe someday, hopefully.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think you're not alone. I think there's been, I've seen it where people they all have the one project that they worked on that didn't air, but then they all you get closer from that, saying like, oh, you were on that project too. We were all on that project, but it didn't come through. But it still builds that connection and that network for people who then can work on projects that come through.
Absolutely. And I do have dear friends from that production as well.
That's good. Is that something where you would be able to consider animating it over time if you have some of?
I wouldn't do that probably, only because it's there are interviews with Dr. Angelo and celebrity guests, so I wouldn't want to do that. But I could see there being animated segments, but I don't want to speak too much about it because I'm still, like I said, I'm serious. This is going to be seen. It needs to be seen.
That's good. And it's what you were saying. So the timing is very important. So for for people that you're mentoring, I guess, how are you usually advising them for timing? What are things that people can do if it's not the right time for a specific career or a specific entry point or project?
There are always different ways. That's the other thing. Excuse me, I'm turning this other thing off. There are always things you can do, and there are always multiple ways to, get to any certain point. And sometimes the points change, right? So if, for example, it's not time to pitch this show, what if there was the game? What if there was a different show? What if there was, how can you pivot your storytelling in a way that's going to feel meaningful for you and further your cause? Because I've worked with people who were pitching a show and they decided to create the graphic novel instead. Well, there are outlets for that now, right? So it's like, let's take a look at what you have and what is available to you, because it's often more than you think.
Okay.
And that's just sort of brainstorming with them. And sometimes, it might be obnoxious, but I said, okay, here's homework. Write down 10 things you have right now. 10 things, and they may not seem like they're connected, but then we will circle back and then go through that list and just do a sort of like what ifs. If money was no object, if there were, what would be the dream for this, dream for that, dream for that? And then you sort of, because I'm a producer, you work backward from here's what the dream is. Well, this part's achievable. Because sometimes, when you're starting out, you think like, this is what I want to do right here.
Yes.
But there's something really useful right here too, right? There are always all these useful pieces that eventually can make that feel very, very rich, and bigger and more impactful than you thought.
Does that make sense? And so I guess for people, because like you said, the industry is changing a little bit. So I think some people might have,
Hmm.
some artists and creatives might have a little bit more time on their hands than they had expected
Yeah.
in the coming months. What are some experiences
Hmm.
that you think are important to the animation industry or to the creative industry, that they can maybe find those experiences while they wait for the right timing to get hired or for their next project?
Yeah, and it obviously it depends on what their craft
Mhm.
is. But if they're an animator, I would brush up on your craft. If you could get a harmony license, if there are
Mhm.
ways to work on that, do so. It's like putting yourself out there. It is often scary, but taking the leap. At a certain point, you don't have anything to lose.
Mhm.
And one of the things I think that's important that I had to learn was worrying about other people's perception of what you're doing. It just it takes up way too much brain
Yeah.
space. I can't worry about like, well, I'm going to be gig driving so that I at night, so during the day I can do my other thing.
Mhm.
You're going to have to make the things work for
Mhm.
you. Um, So if you're writing, write. Honestly, write more. But I would also say read more. And if you're um, wanting to write film, watch more films. Just research your area of interest and passion and expertise. Because what you don't want to do is just get in your head and swirl. Because sometimes when you're
Yes.
creative,
Yeah.
your head can be the vortex of doom.
Yeah. Yeah. It's creative
And you
there too, and it gets a little bit too creative on opportunities. Yeah.
Exactly. So do more research, practice whatever your craft is, and go to see other people doing it too. Go to see the experts who are doing what you think you'd want to do,
Mhm.
um, and like pay attention, like deeply pay attention. I think,
Okay.
um, and if you're able to connect with people, ask those questions. Um, how did that feel for you? What did you do to do X, Y, Z? How did you recover from a failure?
Mhm.
You know, what does resilience feel like, right? Because you have persistence and resilience in this industry, in I think, and in life in general, but especially in creative industries, are really, really important.
You're kind of leading to my next question then. So what does, because that's a good point though, and I think with your experience though, what does resilience look like on your side?
Mm. Um, Resilience actually also means, for me, it means giving myself the permission and taking away the judgment of the times where I feel like I suck, because everybody goes there sometime.
Mhm.
I'll give myself a good 24 hours to sit in the vortex of I suck. And then I'm the kind of person, like, if I can have a good cry, I'm good, because that gets all the crap out of
Yep.
it. And now let's say, okay, now, and I go back to my own homework. What are 10 things I have right now?
Okay.
What can I do today? And sometimes what I need to do today is nothing. And I'm still good.
Yep. And that's okay.
Um, Yes. So then sort of dust yourself off and take whatever your next step is. It doesn't have to be a big step. It just has to be a step. Take that next step and continue to do that. I also am, I clearly like to talk, right? So
I'm glad. It's good for you.
I have two sisters, and they're my best friends,
Hmm.
and I will call my sisters. And what I love about them is that we have the safe space where we can say, okay, I might be tripping, but how does this sound to you?
Hmm.
And it's interesting because I'm the big sister, so sometimes in certain family dynamics you don't want to say stuff to the big sister. If I invite it, it's like, please tell me I'm tripping.
Yes.
Please tell me what this looks like. I thought I was graceful. Did that seem graceful to you? Check me. I think having that kind of network, if it's your friends, it could be family, found family, whatever it is, people who will check you,
Hmm.
people who'll be honest with you, honest and graceful. You don't have to be honest and an asshole. You can just be honest and graceful.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, helps in the process of resilience. And then that just sort of the foundation, then like, okay, I'm good. I've had that 24-hour thing, and now I'm going to take the steps.
Oh, that's awesome. And I know, at least with my little sister, she can just give me a face and I just know sometimes. And she doesn't need to say anything else. That's how we are.
Yes. Yep.
No, that's good. It's crucial to have that support network. What do you think studios could be, or what could people, I guess, in general could be doing to foster those networks, or to make things a little bit easier at a studio in an environment?
I think studios just being intentional about the importance of that, of all those things, sort of the holistic. It sounds corny to talk about the corporate culture, but I think it's important to be mindful of what your culture is and be honest with yourselves about what the culture is. So the difference between saying we do this, 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 and this, but if that's just a statement on a website and is not the reality of the people who are boots on the ground doing the work where you work, then that's it. It's just wasteful and it's dishonest. So I think being mindful about what the corporate culture is, listening to people who are working there, asking people what's important to them, but also I think understanding that that diversity, equity, and inclusion, mental health, and wellness, holistic approaches to what the workplace should look like and feel like and be like, involving everybody who works there. And certainly those decisions need to be made by leadership. But I think if it's important to leadership, then those changes can be made. They can make people aware of resources. They can bring resources in. Just being really active and intentional, because words are just words. So we need the intentions and the actions behind those. Corporations need to walk the walk. Basically.
And they need to understand why it is that they're doing it, why it's important.
Yes. Well, why is it important? Not just with saying it is because those are the buzzwords of the day.
Yeah, that's true. Were there times where there were challenges around those topics for you in your experience, and what were you able to do to overcome some of them?
Sure. Earlier in my experience in my career, where there were very few women and women of color, it was about culture and sometimes just cluelessness. Like there's certain executives or groups of executives that that are not are not used to thinking about those kinds of things.
They don't realize.
And having to educate people. I think the fact that also that I know who I am, as I've mentioned, and I started a little later rather in my career, so I was very comfortable educating in a way that was graceful and humorous, and not necessarily having to dress anyone down in large groups, because it's not something I would like. So I try to not do that. There are times when you have to be very clear and firm, just like with my children. But sometimes you have to say no, and you have to say no loudly. But I've always tried to meet people where they are.
Yes.
Right? Without the judgment. I sometimes have a tough time with the judgment in a tone, because I think because my voice is a little deeper, so people think that I'm being patronizing, and that's not my intention. My intention is always like, let's have a conversation. Here's why you should think about such and such. Here's why this was not acceptable. Here's a better way to do this. Here's what we can do, as opposed to you need to. And sometimes that's the goal. But here's what we can do to make this better, so it doesn't happen going forward. But then, I also have to walk that line of having to be responsible then for keeping people accountable. And asking people for accountability is a big deal, because very often people want to be right and they want to be not embarrassed. And accountability is tough, but it's necessary. It's just necessary.
Yeah, but it's true. It can be a very emotional process, which you then have to manage
Yes.
the emotion, even though really you're already educating them.
Yep.
Okay.
But it's okay if you make it a conversation. It'll be worth it. You will have done what you're supposed to do. That's where I can. That's what I can control. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find there's easy things for people to do that maybe would make your job of educating them sometimes a little bit easier? Things that I guess people can do first, so that you're not having to hold everyone accountable, I guess, every time.
I think having one-on-one conversations is helpful. I tend to show that I am safe being vulnerable, and I expect that from you too. Just laying a foundation about here are our rules of engagement in this discourse.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how we're going to do this. And I think laying the ground rules first is helpful in tougher conversations.
Okay, but it builds the foundations for you to be able to connect with them.
Yes.
After. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so we have a couple minutes left.
Yeah.
So I guess I'd be interested in learning. So we talked a little bit more about Clifton House. In the coming months, are there specific initiatives that you're working on, or I guess any pieces of advice that you would give to people for the next couple months that you expect will happen?
At Clifton House, I mean, we're still slotting things. There are initiatives. We're doing partnerships with local organizations and international organizations.
Mm-hmm.
We have an event happening in April here in Los Angeles, in partnership with SAG-AFTRA Foundation and Gina Davis's C. Jane Foundation. So it's a poetry reading with my mom's work to benefit the Clifton House, and also to celebrate her legacy and to spread the word about upcoming workshops.
Okay.
But I'd say follow us on Instagram. And,
perfect.
Yeah. And learn all about it.
No, that's good. And then you're part of. Are you part of structured mentorship, or you've just been a mentor over time for quite a few people?
I've been a mentor over time. Structured ones I have done, but I find because of my bandwidth, if I can just be useful to someone, even if it's not in a structured way, I'm happy to do that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Just want to be useful.
Yeah. So just sometimes just the one piece of advice can make a big impact for people.
Sure. Yeah. It's happened for me. So.
Okay. So was there a specific piece of advice that you got that helped you over your experience?
The advice primarily was just to bring all of me to the table.
Okay. I
don't have to pretend to be somebody else. And if you're in a room, it's because you belong there. So the whole, I have not really ever suffered from imposter syndrome, because if I'm here, I'm supposed to be here.
With your whole self and your exact voice, and not being something else.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Exactly. And my platform shoes, because there are days when I want to be 6'2", so I put the platform shoes on and I'm like, yep.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, that's good. I like that.
Yeah.
And I guess part of it too is that you're working on stories, like you were saying, walking the walk. You're working on stories that will expand people's understanding. There's more conversations happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the more we know about each other, the more we recognize that we're not just our brother's keeper, but our brother and our sister.
Mm-hmm.
We can help try to tear down some of this madness that we're seeing.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's always crucial. And then growing networks. Is that something where you kind of recommend people can reach out to each other and even remotely?
Yes. Okay. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's always good.
Because it's a way to connect now, and I think we're no longer afraid of that. So.
Yes, and yeah, and I think will we see you at events in the coming year? You were saying other than those two.
Yes. Hmm. Yes.
Okay, we can keep
The
it.
poetry reading being one of them, but yeah, there are other things coming up as well.
Okay, that's amazing. Well, I did want to thank you again for being with us today and for taking the time to share your experiences in your career. And we'll hope to see
Thank
you
you.
again soon.
Thank you so much,
Awesome.
Lisa. Thank you for having me. It was fun.